Welcome to True Crime Cases, where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature. Today's episode unravels a tale of wife-swap fantasy, earned to obsession, and tragic murder. In the picturesque city of Naperville, Illinois, nestled just 28 miles west of Chicago, life seemed to flow with an air of tranquility and prosperity. Known for its excellent schools, low crime rate, and family-friendly atmosphere, Naperville had consistently ranked as one of the best places to live in the United States. But beneath the surface of manicured lawns and well-maintained Tudor-style homes, a dark undercurrent was about to pull four families into a vortex of desire, betrayal, and ultimately, murder. Case begins with two couples, the Harrisons and the Caldwells. Both families lived on the same street in the prestigious Thornberry Wood subdivision, their houses separated by just 3 others. To the outside world, they represented the epitome of suburban success. Marcus Harrison, 42, was a high-powered executive at a Fortune 500 company headquartered in downtown Chicago. His wife, Evelyn Harrison, 39, worked as a part-time interior designer, balancing her career with raising their 2 children, Susan, 14, and Elijah, 11. Marcus was known for his charismatic personality and sharp business acumen, while Evelyn was admired for her impeccable taste and warm demeanor. Just down the street lived the Caldwells. Richard Caldwell, 45, was a prominent cardiothoracic surgeon at Edward Hospital. His wife, Vanessa Caldwell, 38, was a former model turned stay-at-home mom to their 3 children, twins Jackson and Emma, 13, and Lucas, 9. Richard's steady hands and cool temperament made him one of the most sought-after surgeons in the state, while Vanessa's stunning looks and philanthropic efforts made her a fixture in Naperville's social scene. On the surface, both couples seemed to have it all. Their children excelled in school and extracurricular activities. They hosted lavish parties for neighbors and colleagues, and they were active members of the community. The Harrisons and Caldwells often socialized together, attending the same charity events and their children's school functions. They even vacationed together once, a week-long trip to a luxurious resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. But behind closed doors, cracks were beginning to show in both marriages. Marcus Harrison's long hours at the office and frequent business trips had left Evelyn feeling neglected and unfulfilled. She threw herself into her design work and the children's activities, but a gnawing emptiness persisted. Meanwhile, Richard Caldwell's demanding schedule at the hospital meant he was often absent from family dinners and events. Vanessa, who had given up her modeling career to focus on family, found herself increasingly restless and yearning for the excitement past life. It was during a neighborhood block party in the summer of 2019 that the seeds of disaster were first sown. As the adults gathered around the grill, drinks flowing freely, the conversation turned to a popular reality TV show about couples swapping partners. What started as light-hearted banter soon took on a more serious tone as the night wore on and inhibitions lowered. Vanessa Caldwell, her face flushed from one too many glasses of rosé, leaned in close to Evelyn Harrison and whispered, "Wouldn't it be wild if we actually did that?" Evelyn, caught off guard, laughed nervously and tried to change the subject. But the idea had taken root, and over the next few weeks it became a frequent topic of hushed conversations and meaningful glances between the 2 women. At first it was just fantasy talk, a way to inject some excitement into their lives. Evelyn and Vanessa would meet for coffee and giggle over the possibilities, half-jokingly planning how they might broach the subject with their husband. They convinced themselves it was harmless fun, a shared secret, brought them closer as friends. But as summer turned to fall, fantasy began to consume Vanessa. She found herself obsessing over the idea, imagining intimate scenarios with Marcus Harrison while picturing Evelyn with her husband Richard. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that this was the solution to the emptiness she felt in her life. Evelyn, on the other hand, began to have second thoughts. While the idea had initially seemed thrilling, she was starting to feel uncomfortable with the direction their conversations were taking. She tried to steer their coffee dates back to safer topics, like their children's activities or upcoming community events, but Vanessa always managed to bring the conversation back to their plan. As Halloween approached, Vanessa's obsession reached a fever pitch. She decided it was time to turn fantasy into reality. Without consulting Evelyn, she approached Marcus Harrison after a neighborhood watch meeting, under the guise of discussing a potential home renovation project. Vanessa invited Marcus over to her house the following evening, assuring him that Richard would be working late at the hospital. Marcus, flattered by the attention and oblivious to Vanessa's true intentions, agreed to the meeting. He mentioned it casually to Evelyn that night, explaining that he was going to give Vanessa some advice on remodeling their basement. Evelyn felt a knot form in her stomach, but she pushed her concerns aside, not wanting to seem paranoid or jealous. The next evening, October 30th, Marcus arrived at the Caldwell home just after 8 p.m. Vanessa greeted him at the door, dressed in a way that made her intentions clear. Before Marcus could fully process what was happening, Vanessa had pulled him inside and was kissing him passionately. For a moment, Marcus was swept up in the intensity of the situation, but as Vanessa began to unbutton his shirt, reality came crashing down. He pulled away, stammering apologies and excuses. Vanessa, her face a mixture of hurt and anger, lashed out, accusing Marcus of leading her on and playing with her emotions. As Marcus hurried out of the house, he nearly collided with Richard Caldwell, who had decided to come home early to surprise his wife. The two men exchanged awkward greetings, with Marcus muttering something about a misunderstanding about the renovation consultation. Richard, noting Marcus's disheveled appearance and Vanessa's state of undress visible through the open door, felt a surge of suspicion and rage. What happened next would be pieced together later by detectives, forensic experts, and witness statements. Richard stormed into the house, demanding an explanation. Vanessa, stilling from Morris's rejection and now faced with her husband's fury, broke down and confessed everything: the fantasy, the planning, and her failed attempt to seduce Marcus. Richard's reaction was explosive. Neighbors would later report hearing shouting and the sound of breaking glass. In a blind rage, Richard grabbed a heavy crystal vase, a wedding gift from Vanessa's parents, and struck his wife repeatedly. By the time he came to his senses, Vanessa lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling around her head. Panic set in as Richard realized the magnitude of what he had done. His medical training kicked in, and he checked for vital signs, but it was too late. Vanessa Caldwell was dead. In the hours that followed, Richard Caldwell made a series of decisions that would seal his fate. Instead of calling the police, he decided to cover up his crime. He meticulously cleaned the crime scene, using his knowledge of forensics to erase any trace of what had transpired. He wrapped Vanessa's body in a tarp and loaded it into the trunk of his car. Under the cover of darkness, Richard drove to the nearby Springbrook Prairie Forest Preserve. He buried Vanessa's body in a remote area of the preserve, covering the disturbed earth with leaves and branches. As he drove home, he formulated his case. Vanessa had left him. They had a fight, and she stormed out, saying she needed time away to think. For the next few days, life in Naperville continued as normal. Richard told friends and neighbors that Vanessa had gone to stay with her sister in Michigan after an argument. He even called Vanessa's sister to maintain the ruse, explaining that Vanessa might reach out and asking her to let him know if she did. Evelyn Harrison, consumed by guilt over her role in encouraging the swapping fantasy, avoided both Richard and Marcus. She threw herself into Halloween preparations, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for her children. Marcus, equally guilt-ridden but for different reasons, buried himself in work, staying late at the office to avoid facing Evelyn or running into Richard. As days turned into weeks, suspicion began to grow. Vanessa's friends noticed her absence from school events and social gatherings. Her sister, having not heard from Vanessa, came increasingly worried. Finally, on November 18th, nearly 3 weeks after Vanessa's disappearance, her sister filed a missing person report with the Naperville Police Department. Detective Sarah Chen, a 15-year veteran of the force, was assigned to the case. From the beginning, something about Richard Caldwell's case didn't sit right with her. His demeanor during initial questioning was too calm, too rehearsed, and the idea that Vanessa would abandon her children without any contact seemed out of character for the devoted mother. As Detective Chen dug deeper, inconsistencies in Richard's account and to emerge. Surveillance footage from their neighborhood showed Vanessa's car had never left the garage. Credit card records showed no activity on Vanessa's accounts since the night of October 30th. And perhaps most damning, Richard had been seen purchasing an unusually large amount of cleaning supplies the day after Vanessa supposedly left. The investigation intensified. Caldwell home was searched, and despite Richard's efforts, trace amounts of blood were found using luminol. DNA testing confirmed it was Vanessa's. Richard Caldwell was brought in for questioning. For hours, Richard maintained his innocence, sticking to his case about Vanessa leaving after an argument, but as Detective Chen presented the mounting evidence against him, composure began to crack. In a moment of weakness, he blurted out, "She betrayed me. She wanted to be with him." This outburst led to a series of rapid-fire questions from Detective Chen. Who was he? What betrayal? Slowly, painfully, the truth began to emerge. Richard confessed to killing Vanessa in a fit of rage after discovering her attempted infidelity. He provided details about disposing of her body in Springbrook Prairie. The news of Richard Caldwell's arrest and Vanessa's murder sent shockwaves through Naperville. The community, known for its safety and tranquility, was rocked to its core. How could such a tragedy occur in their midst? And how had they not noticed something was amiss? As the full case came to light during Richard's trial, the scandal deepened. The revelation of the wife-swapping fantasy and the involvement of the Harrisons added another layer of shock and disbelief. Marcus and Evelyn Harrison, though not criminally implicated, found themselves at the center of a media frenzy and community backlash. Richard Caldwell was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. His medical license was revoked, and he would spend the rest of his life haunted by the consequences of his actions. The aftermath of the tragedy lingered long after the trial concluded. Caldwell children, now orphaned by their mother's death and their father's imprisonment, were taken in by Vanessa's sister. They faced years of therapy and struggled to come to terms with the violent end of their once idyllic family life. Marcus and Evelyn Harrison, their marriage strained to the breaking point by the scandal, ultimately divorced. Marcus moved out of state, unable to face the constant reminders of his role in the tragedy. Evelyn remained in Naperville, determined to rebuild her life and care for her children, but forever marked by the consequences of a fantasy gone terribly wrong. Community of Naperville, once so proud of its perfect image, was forced to confront the dark undercurrents that can exist even in the most seemingly ideal settings. Neighborhood watch programs were strengthened, counseling services were expanded, and efforts were made to create more open dialogue about marital issues and mental health. As years passed, the case of the Caldwells and Harrisons became a cautionary tale, whispered about at dinner parties and discussed in hushed tones at school pickup lines. It served as a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that the quest for excitement and fulfillment can sometimes lead down a deadly path. The Springbrook Prairie Forest Preserve, once a popular spot for family picnics and nature walks, took on a more somber atmosphere. A small memorial for Vanessa Caldwell was erected near the site where her body was found, serving as a poignant reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded in their community. In the end, the tale of suburban swapping in Naperville left an indelible mark on all involved. It was a case of desire, betrayal, and the terrible consequences, unchecked obsession. For those who lived through it, the events of that fateful autumn would forever serve as a reminder of how quickly the American dream can transform into a nightmare. As Naperville slowly healed and life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, the legacy of the Caldwell-Harrison scandal lingered. It became a part of the city's lore, a dark chapter in its otherwise bright history. New residents moving into the area would eventually hear whispers of the case, a tale that seemed almost too shocking to be true. The tragedy also sparked broader discussions about the pressures of maintaining a perfect facade in suburban America. Social media posts and carefully curated public personas were now viewed with a more skeptical eye. The idea that one's neighbors might be hiding dark secrets or grappling with unspoken desires added a layer of complexity to community interactions. For the children involved, the road to recovery was long and challenging. The Caldwell twins, Daxon and Emma, along with their younger brother Lucas, struggled with the dual trauma of losing their mother and the public vilification of their father. They faced cruel whispers and sideways glances at school, eventually leading their aunt to make the difficult decision to move them to another state for a fresh start. Susan and Elijah Harrison, while spared the loss of a parent, grappled with their own set of challenges. They had to navigate the fallout of their parents' divorce and the lingering stigma associated with their family's involvement in the scandal. Susan, in particular, threw herself into activism, eventually starting a support group, Children Affected by High-Profile Crimes. The ripple effects of the tragedy extended far beyond the immediate families involved. The entire Thornberry Woods subdivision became the subject of intense media scrutiny. Property values in the area plummeted as the notoriety of the case drove potential buyers away. Some longtime residents, unable to bear the constant reminders of what had transpired, chose to move away, further changing the fabric of the once tight-knit community. Local law enforcement, particularly Detective Sarah Chen, faced both praise and criticism for their handling of the case. While Chen was lauded for her persistence in uncovering the truth, questions were raised about why it took so long for Vanessa's disappearance. He investigated. This led to a review of missing persons protocols and increased training for officers in recognizing signs of domestic violence and coercive control. The case also had a profound impact on the medical community in Naperville and beyond. Richard Caldwell had been a respected surgeon, and his fall from grace sent shockwaves through professional circles. It prompted discussions about work-life balance in high-stress medical professions and the importance of mental health support for healthcare workers. As the years passed, the case of the Naperville wife-swapping murder became the subject of true crime books, podcasts, and even a made-for-TV movie. Each new iteration brought fresh waves of attention to the community, reopening old wounds and reigniting debates about privacy, morality, and the dark side of suburban life. One unexpected outcome of the tragedy was a renewed focus on marriage counseling and relationship education in Naperville. Local churches and community centers began offering workshops on communication and conflict resolution in relationships. The school district even incorporated lessons on healthy relationships and recognizing signs of obsessive behavior into their health curricula. For Evelyn Harrison, the years following the scandal were a journey of self-discovery and redemption. After her divorce from Marcus, she channeled her energy into her interior design business, eventually gaining recognition for her work in creating healing spaces. Trauma survivor, she became an advocate for mental health awareness, sharing her case as a cautionary tale about the dangers of living a life dictated by appearances and unspoken desires. Marcus Harrison, in contrast, struggled to rebuild his life after moving away from Naperville. The scandal had tainted his professional reputation, and he found himself starting over in a new city, haunted by guilt and what-ifs. It would take years of therapy and soul-searching before he could forgive himself for his role in the events that led to Vanessa's death. The Naperville Police Department, determined to learn from the case, implemented new training programs focused on recognizing signs of domestic tension and potential violence in seemingly perfect households. They also strengthened their community outreach efforts, working to build trust and open lines of communication with residents. As the 10th anniversary of Vanessa Caldwell's death approached, Naperville found itself at a crossroads. The city had changed in many ways since that fateful night in 2019. Perfect veneer had been cracked, revealing a more complex and human community underneath. While the scars of the tragedy remained, there was also a sense of resilience and a commitment to honesty and authenticity that had emerged from the ashes of scandal. A group of community leaders, including some of the first responders who had been involved in the case, proposed a memorial garden in honor of Vanessa and other victims of domestic violence. The idea was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it would be a fitting tribute and a place for reflection, while others worried it would serve as a constant reminder of the darkest chapter in Naperville's recent history. After months of heated town hall meetings and online debates, a compromise was reached. A small, serene garden would be created in a quiet corner of the Riverwalk Park. It would feature a simple stone monument with an inscription that read, "In memory of those lost to violence, may we learn, heal, and grow stronger together." The garden would serve not only as a memorial, but also as a space for education, with plaques providing information on recognizing signs of domestic abuse and resources for those seeking help. On the day of the garden's dedication, a crowd gathered that reflected the complex emotions still swirling through the community. Evelyn Harrison, who had become a vocal advocate for domestic violence awareness, was invited to speak. Her presence was a stark reminder of how intertwined the lives of the Harrisons and Caldwells had become. Even in tragedy, as Evelyn stepped up to the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. He spoke with a quiet strength, her voice occasionally wavering with emotion. 10 years ago, we thought we knew our neighbors, our friends, ourselves. It began. We lived in a bubble of perceived perfection, afraid to acknowledge our flaws and desires. The price of that silence was too high. Today we gather not just to remember Vanessa, but to commit ourselves to a community of honesty, support, and true connection. Her words resonated with many in the audience, including Jackson and Emma Caldwell, now in their early 20s, who had returned to Naperville for the first time in years to attend the dedication. They sat in the back, holding hands, their faces a mixture of grief and resolve. Their younger brother, Lucas, had chosen not to attend, the wounds still too raw despite the passage of time. As the ceremony concluded, an unexpected guest arrived. Marcus Harrison. He had kept a low profile since leaving Naperville, but felt compelled to return for this moment of community healing. His presence caused a stir, with whispers rippling through the crowd. Evelyn, seeing him for the first time in years, felt a complex surge of emotion. Anger, sadness, and a hint of the old connection they once shared. Marcus made no attempt to speak publicly, but approached the monument after most of the crowd had dispersed. He stood there, head bowed, for several long minutes. When he turned away, those nearby could see tears streaming down his face. The garden became a place of quiet reflection for many Naperville residents. It was not uncommon to see people sitting on the benches, lost in thought, or engaging in hushed conversations. For some, it was a place to confront their own secrets and unspoken truths. For others, it was a reminder to check in on their neighbors and friends, to look beyond the facade of perfection suburban life often demanded. The tragedy had also led to changes in local journalism. The Naperville Sun, the city's longtime local newspaper, had initially been criticized for its sensationalistic coverage of the scandal. In response, they hired a new editor who championed a more nuanced approach to reporting on community issues. They began a series called Beyond the Picket Fence, which explored the challenges faced by families in maintaining work-life balance, dealing with mental health issues, and navigating the complexities of modern relationships. One of the most poignant stories in the series featured an interview with Richard Caldwell, conducted in prison. Now in his mid-50s, Richard's once distinguished appearance given way to a gaunt, haunted look. He spoke of the pressures he had felt to maintain a perfect image, the long hours at the hospital that had distanced him from his family, and the explosive anger that had always simmered beneath his calm exterior. "I thought I was living the American dream," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I was so focused on appearances, on what others thought of me, that I lost sight of what really mattered. I failed to see the pain in my wife's eyes, the distance growing between us, and in one moment of blind rage, I destroyed everything I held dear." The interview was controversial, with some feeling it gave a platform to a murderer, while others saw it as an important cautionary tale. It sparked renewed discussions about toxic masculinity, the importance of emotional intelligence, and the need for better support systems, high-stress professions. As Naperville approached the end of its first decade post-tragedy, signs of healing were evident. So too were the lasting scars. The Thornberry Woods subdivision, once the epitome of suburban success, had undergone a transformation. Some houses stood empty, while others had been bought by a new generation of families, drawn by the now affordable prices in a still desirable school district. The Harrison house had been sold years ago, but the Caldwell home remained unsold, a silent monument to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. There were occasional discussions about what to do with the property: turn it into a community center, demolish it and create a park, or simply let it stand as a reminder, but no consensus had been reached, and so it remained, a haunting presence in the neighborhood. The children of both families, now adults, had taken different paths in dealing with their shared trauma. Susan Harrison had become a therapist, specializing in helping children and teenagers cope with family crises. Elijah had pursued a career in law enforcement, driven by a desire to protect others from experiencing the kind of tragedy that had torn apart his community. Caldwell children had struggled more visibly. Jackson had battled addiction in his late teens, the weight of his family's legacy proving too much to bear at times. With the support of his sisters and aunt, he had found sobriety and was cautiously rebuilding his life. Emma had channeled her pain into art, creating haunting sculptures that spoke to themes of loss, betrayal, and resilience. Lucas, the youngest, had chosen a life of quiet anonymity, changing his name and moving to a small town where no one knew his case. As for the wider community of Naperville, the scandal had left an indelible mark on the city's psyche. The facade of perfection had been irrevocably cracked, but in its place had grown a more authentic, empathetic community. Neighbors were more likely to check in on each other, offer support during difficult times, and to acknowledge that behind every front door, people were dealing with their own struggle. The city had also become more proactive in addressing issues of mental health and relationship counseling. The local park district now offered free meditation and stress management classes. The public library hosted regular workshops on topics ranging from communication in marriage to recognizing signs of depression in loved ones. Even the annual Naperville Rib Fest, a beloved community event, had evolved. While still centered around food and music, it now included a wellness village, where local organizations provided information on mental health resources, domestic violence support, and family counseling services. The tragedy had also sparked a wider conversation about the pressures of suburban life across the country. Naperville became a case study in sociology classes and the subject of academic papers, examining the darker side of the American dream. Journalists and authors flocked to the city, seeking to understand how a community rebuilds itself after such a public and devastating event. One such author, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist named Rachel Kwan, spent a year living in Naperville to write a book about the long-term impact of Caldwell Harrison scandal. Her work, Shadows in the Subdivision, Tragedy and Redemption in an American Suburb, became a national bestseller and was eventually adapted into a critically acclaimed documentary series. Kwan's work brought a new wave of attention to Naperville, but this time, community was better prepared to handle the scrutiny. City leaders, business owners, and everyday citizens spoke candidly about the challenges they had faced and the lessons learned. They didn't shy away from the darker aspects of their history, but instead emphasized how they had used the tragedy, the catalyst for positive change. As the 10th anniversary of Vanessa's death approached, there was talk of a more significant commemoration. The idea was met with mixed emotions, but ultimately the community decided to move forward with a week-long series of events focused on healing, community building, and domestic violence awareness. The week culminated in a candlelight vigil at the Memorial Garden. As the sun set on a crisp autumn evening, hundreds of Naperville residents gathered, candles in hand. The crowd was a testament to how the community had changed, more diverse, more open, and more united in their shared humanity. As the flames flickered in the gathering darkness, Detective Sarah Chen, now the chief of police, stepped forward to speak. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the worst of human nature, but still believed in the possibility of redemption. 10 years ago, we were shaken to our core, she began. We lost not just Vanessa Caldwell, but our sense of security, our trust in each other, and our belief in the perfect suburban dream. But from that loss, we have gained something precious, a real community, one that acknowledges its flaws, faces its challenges head-on, and supports each other through the darkest of time. As Chen spoke, many in the crowd nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. The pain of the past was still there, but so too was a sense of hope, a belief that from great tragedy, great change could come. The vigil concluded with a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of distant train whistles and the rustle of leaves in the cool night air. As the crowd began to disperse, there was a sense that while the Caldwell-Harrison tragedy would always be a part of Naperville's case, it would not define the community's future. In the years that followed, Naperville continued to evolve. The lessons learned from the tragedy became ingrained in the community's DNA. Passed down to new generations and shared with newcomers, the city became known not for the perfect facade it once presented, but for its resilience, its commitment to mental health and well-being, and its willingness to confront difficult truths. The case of Vanessa Caldwell, Richard Caldwell, and the Harrisons became more than just a cautionary tale, became a turning point, a moment when a community chose to reject the illusion of perfection in favor of authentic connection and mutual support, and in doing so, they created something far more valuable than the suburban ideal they had once chased, a truly resilient, passionate, and honest community. As the lights of Naperville twinkled in the night, reflecting off the calm waters of the DuPage River, the city stood as a testament to the complex nature of human relationships, the dangers of unchecked desires, and the power of a community to heal and grow stronger in the face of unimaginable tragedy. The Caldwell-Harrison case would forever be a part of Naperville's history, a dark chapter that could not be erased. But it was no longer the end of the case. Instead, it had become the beginning of a new narrative, one of transformation, resilience, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thank you for joining us for this chilling tale of suburban tragedy. We appreciate your attention and hope this case has provided both entertainment and food for thought. Remember, reality can often be stranger and more complex than fiction. Stay tuned for more gripping true crime narratives in our upcoming videos. Until next time, stay safe and keep watching.